For many people, the great vaulting sky is a symbol of freedom. Seen from the distance above, life can seem peaceful. But when disaster comes from the sky, the consequences are deadly, changing lives forever. (1968). Bradford, Pennsylvania is a thriving community surrounded by rugged beauty, forests, rivers, and valleys.
Most of the area around here is woods. We're part of the Allegheny National Forest. There's a lot of private wooded areas around here.
Located 300 kilometers northeast of Pittsburgh, Bradford, Pennsylvania is a prosperous city. Industry and energy resources fuel this community and provide a stable environment for the many families that call Bradford home.
Well, for me, Bradford in the 60s was a booming town. It was very exciting. We had a lot of industry here. The population was doubled what it is right now.
In 1968, Bradford is also a busy center for air travel. Allegheny Airlines Flight 736 is a passenger flight from Detroit, Michigan to Washington, D.C., with stops in Erie, Bradford, and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Flight 736 is serviced by the reliable Convair 580.
It was a very nice airplane. It was high-powered, had a good power-to-weight ratio. Our pilots really liked it.
On the night of December 24, 1968, Flight 736 arrives late in Erie, Pennsylvania. Passengers board quickly, anxious to get on with their Christmas holiday travel. Susan Wyand is one of the passengers on Flight 736. A secretary at St. Vincent's Health Center in Erie, Susan has booked one of the last possible flights in order to meet her family for Christmas in Washington, D.C.
Our family was trying to get together for Christmas. My oldest brother and his wife lived in Washington, D.C., and my parents had already gone down to visit them because they had a new baby.
Also on board is Dr. Frederick Dankmeyer, a resident eye specialist at the Mayo Clinic. He is rushing to the side of his mother, who has just suffered a heart attack. Flight attendant Rita Boylan ensures that passengers are comfortable before the airplane departs.
One couple traveling with their 2 teenage children were separated. She and her daughter were asked to move to a different part of the plane for balance. They were an Erie family.
For young Kathy Angel and her family, a simple change in seating arrangements will prove to be life-altering. In the cockpit of Allegheny Airlines Flight 736 is experienced pilot Captain Gary Lee and his co-pilot, First Officer Richard Bruce Gardner.
I remember looking out the window before takeoff as we were taxiing down the runway, and the snow was so intense that it was hard to see the light at the end of the wing. I guess I was in an age of innocence thinking, gee, isn't it amazing that they can fly in this kind of weather?
50 minutes behind schedule, at approximately 7:46 p.m., Allegheny Airlines Flight 736 departs Erie, Pennsylvania for Bradford. 47 people on board. In the destination city of Bradford, Pennsylvania, Christmas celebrations are well underway. Roy Compton, a member of the Mount Jewett Volunteer Fire Department, takes his family to visit his mother and father at their home not far from the Bradford Airport.
While we were there, it was snowing real hard and things, and I told my wife we should go home because the roads are getting bad.
As Flight 736 nears the Bradford Airport, Captain Lee and First Officer Gardner prepare to perform a standard but relatively outdated VOR approach. This type of approach uses a radio beacon to locate the airport.
You fly over the radio beacon. There's a needle which will swing around as you pass over the beacon, so you know exactly where you are. When you're over that beacon, you do what is called a procedure turn. You fly outbound away from the airport over this beacon, do a turn so that you turn inbound and you pass a second time then over the beacon, headed directly for the airport.
In order to descend safely to the runway, the pilot must follow a prescribed approach plate, usually while keeping a visual watch on the ground.
That approach plate will give directions. It'll give headings that you're to fly, and it'll also give altitudes. And it will give an MDA, a minimum descent altitude, which you're not supposed to go below.
On Christmas Eve, 1968, the landing at the Bradford Airport will prove anything but normal for the passengers and crew of Allegheny Airlines Flight 736. On Christmas Eve, 1968, Allegheny Airlines Flight 736, carrying 47 passengers and crew, prepares to make a standard VOR approach to the Bradford, Pennsylvania airport. At approximately 8 p.m., just 15 minutes after leaving Erie, Flight 736 picks up the signal from the VOR beacon at the Bradford Airport. At 8:06 p.m., the flight crew contacts the Bradford Flight Service Station. They are informed of the weather conditions: light blowing snow, winds 24 kilometers an hour, gusting to 40. Visibility is less than 1 kilometer to just over 2 kilometers. As the plane prepares for its final approach to Bradford, Roy Compton and his mother hear what they believe to be Flight 736 overhead.
My mother, she knows these airplanes. They go out and they make a turn and then they come back. We actually heard it when it come back. And she said, that plane sounds awful funny to me. I don't know why it did, but it just sounded something different to it.
High above them, flight attendant Rita Boylan starts to prepare the passengers for landing.
The flight went on as normal until we were approaching Bradford. And the announcement was made to buckle your seatbelts. We were on final approach, and that the plane would be landing shortly.
While Captain Lee and First Officer Gardner attempt to get a visual fix on the runway, they inadvertently descend below their minimum descent altitude. Neither the flight crew nor the passengers of Allegheny Airlines Flight 736 are aware that the aircraft is rushing towards the ground. In order to help sight the runway, the pilot turns on the airplane's landing lights. At 8:11 p.m., Captain Lee indicates that he can't see the runway. Suddenly, both he and his co-pilot hear a loud thump. First Officer Gardner tells Lee to pull up.
There was turbulence, and all of a sudden, there was a loud ripping sound. I looked out, and I could see the wing was gone. And then there was like electricity or sparks flying through the cabin.
Flight 736 clips a tree in the heavily wooded area near the runway. First, the left wing, and then the right are sheared from the plane as it tumbles, cutting an 800-foot swath through trees and saplings. The plane lands upside down in snow-covered swampland. The impact has ripped the plane open from just below the windshield to the top of the rear cabin door.
I remember regaining consciousness. I was having problems breathing, and I tried to lift a hand to clear something away from my nose. And I tried to scream, and all that would come out was like a moan.
The flight service station at Bradford Airport realizes that Flight 736 is not on the runway where it should be.
When the airplane crashed, no one was really certain that it had crashed.
After failed attempts by both Erie Approach Control and the Bradford Flight Service Station to contact Flight 736, a search and rescue mission is called. Meanwhile, the survivors of the crash are doing their best to stay alive.
It's my understanding they used whatever they could find, pillows, luggage, to build this fire because it was very, very cold. I understand it was 4 degrees Fahrenheit outside and still snowing.
Roy Compton, volunteer at the Mount Jewett Fire Department, leaves his family on Christmas Eve to join the rescue effort.
It was snowing, very, very cold. We were actually plowing snow with a fire truck. And was driving up an old railroad grade down there and happened to spot a little twinkle of light down in like a swampy area. There was like probably 8 or 10 people around a big bonfire in the middle of a swamp down there.
Roy, along with other volunteers and a local doctor, arrived to find the horrific wreckage of Flight 736 and start the search for survivors.
The earth was shoved up inside the plane. I crawled up in the space where I could get up in, and I grabbed onto a person's leg, and it was loose. And I immediately let go of it. It scared me to death.
First person I came to was a lady that was upside down in her seat, hollering, screaming, "Get my baby, get my baby." Dr. Sicker from Kieran Kane showed up, stuck his finger in the baby's mouth, the baby bit him, so he said the baby was all right. The baby was laying on her lap, so she actually protected it. The baby didn't get hurt at all.
We walked around to the front of the plane. There was a stewardess hanging out the front of the plane, and they told her, said, "Just relax, we'll have you out of there in a minute." And she said, "Don't worry about me, get the other people."
Flight attendant Rita Boylan escapes the crash without serious injury. Others are not so fortunate.
There was a lady lying upside down, strapped in her seat, completely flipped over, her head was buried in the dirt. I literally dug the snow and stuff out away from her face with my bare hands so she could breathe.
I could hear people screaming in there. So I crawled in and I found him. It was Dr. Dackmeyer. He had a piece of metal sticking out of his eye. And he's probably a third of the way covered in dirt. I'm trying to dig it off him. I'm trying to pull him out and I can't pull him.
As John and other rescuers dig out Dr. Dankmeyer, they discover that he is pinned down by the legs of a dead body.
Had to break this guy's legs that were wrapped around Dr. Dackmeyer in order to get Dr. Dackmeyer out. We got him out. They hauled him away.
As difficult as it is to locate and remove survivors from the wreckage, the challenge now facing rescuers is transporting the wounded across boggy terrain in the driving snow to the safety of nearby hospitals. And time is running out. Christmas Eve, 1968. Rescuers at the crash site of Allegheny Airlines Flight 736 face the challenges of getting the injured to medical help. Because Flight 736 has crashed in rugged terrain, the rescuers must improvise a method of moving the survivors from the wreckage to waiting ambulances.
But we had a lot of snowmobiles come in. The only way we'd get to them was snowmobiles with little sleds on the back. We're hauling people out to the highway so we could get them out to the ambulances and stuff.
We didn't know what to expect. We had no idea what this plane had gone through or what it had done, flipping over and losing a wing. We just knew it was a plane wreck, so we just went to help.
Susan Wyand, still trapped in her seat, is helped by one of the rescuers.
The gentleman came back and tried to pull me out by reaching under my arms and tugging. He was unable to move me and realized that the seatbelt was still fastened. And he reached down and unfastened the seatbelt, and they pulled me out by my shoulders. The next thing I remember was becoming conscious, I guess, around a fire that survivors had built. I was tied to a toboggan which was hitched to a snowmobile and taken out of the area to an ambulance that was waiting on the road. I remember hearing one of the rescue workers say, "I think we ought to take the kids first." And I thought, I hope they think I'm a kid.
Susan clings to life as she's rushed to the hospital.
I have no recollection of arriving at the hospital. The doctor who treated me said that I was not breathing, but I did have faint heart sounds. And they resuscitated me.
Suffers 4 broken vertebrae, 10 broken ribs, a broken hand, fractured teeth, and internal injuries. Still in the wreckage, John Reimer helps pull Kathy Angel to short-lived safety.
It was Kathy Angel. She was 14 years old, took her out. I remember the doctor said, "No, put her on that cutter and take it nice and easy. She's got a broken neck." Well, she never made it. She died up in the Hammond Hospital.
Like most of the passengers seated in the front of the plane, Kathy and her mother die as a result of the injuries sustained in the crash. Sitting in the rear, Mr. Angel and his son survive. For them, Christmas will forever serve as a reminder of their loss. Christmas morning, 1968, reveals the full extent of the tragedy. The crash of Allegheny Airlines Flight 736 claims the lives of 20 people, including Captain Gary Lee and First Officer Richard Bruce Gardner. Miraculously, 27 people survive, including Susan Wyand, whose rehabilitation from her many injuries eventually returns her to a normal life.
We would have lost several more probably in this plane crash. But that happened on Christmas Eve of all times. Somebody was looking out for them, the people that survived, that's my opinion.
The National Transportation Safety Board immediately launches an investigation into the crash of Flight 736, never suspecting that the Bradford Airport would be the center of yet another tragedy. Just 13 days later, on January 6, 1969, Allegheny Airlines Flight 737, bound from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, crashes short of the runway near the Bradford Airport. While 25 people survive, 11 lose their lives.
I found it very ironic that a similar accident happened 2 weeks later, and extremely coincidental. But I think both accidents were caused by the same effect.
It was unbelievable that a second one in that short a time happened. It made Bradford famous, 2 plane wrecks in that short a period of time.
More than a year later, the crash report for Flight 736 delivers a probable cause. The airplane flew through the minimum descent altitude because the flight crew members were attempting to make visual references to the ground.
If you read the NTSB report, it says the cause of the accident is the pilots flew the airplane into the ground. There must be some reason why they did that. And the only reason I can see is you make an instrument approach. The minute you get any ground contact, see something, you tend to break off the approach on instruments. And from there on, you fly it visually.
As a result of the investigation, the Bradford Airport installs an Instrument Landing System, or ILS.
The ILS system consists of a radio beam going up at about a 3-degree angle. It's very narrow, both up and down and left and right.
This narrow radio beam guides the aircraft all the way to the ground.
I've done it many times, and it's really a great feeling when you can't see a thing, and suddenly you break out of the fog and the clouds, and there's a runway right in front of you. It's a very precise, exact approach.
Experts agree that an instrument landing system would have prevented the crash of Allegheny Airlines Flight 736.
I think that if they had had the instrument landing system at the time of these accidents would never have happened, because they would have flown that beam right down to the runway, and they would not have gotten close to the ground.
There is no memorial to those who lost their lives, but rescuers, survivors, and the loved ones of those who died can never forget the events of Christmas Eve, 1968.
To this day, I can remember that baby crying and those gentlemen going at that plane, trying to get into that plane.
My thoughts are mostly with those who didn't make it and how that must have torn their families apart that Christmas and every Christmas to follow. There were 20 people on that plane that didn't make it. And I think afterwards, there's something called survivor's guilt, where you question, why was it not them and not me? We don't have an answer.
Saw the pilot, co-pilot, both deceased. Couple stewardesses deceased. I saw several of the passengers deceased. To actually experience something like that firsthand, you better hope you never see it in your lifetime.
Are you preparing for a real natural disaster or just want to have a really good camping trip? We've got a whole range of products that we think you're going to love, so come check them out in the store. Just by shopping for them, you help support Bad Day HQ and help us produce more great content.